and nominating their loved ones, and that was basically how it started.
Right, and now there's quite the collection, and if you want to have a look, it's on Facebook. It's called the COVID-19 Portrait Project. And so you asked them a little bit about what they do as well?
So I send them a couple of questions about what's changed in their work and what they have to do differently during that time, and also if they had anything personal that they wanted to add. And I basically keep it exactly how they write back to me. I do a little bit of editing to make it a bit shorter, but everything is their words, basically.
And have you had quite a bit of response? Because this is something, it's a wonderful archive of, what people do and the contributions they make in society, isn't it, at a very stressful time, Lily? I've just had, they're just kind of trickling in, like it's not like a rampant rush of them, but actually that's quite good because they take a little bit of time to do. And lots of them I don't actually, like they're friends of friends, some of them I've never met. So it's actually a real honour that they feel that they can trust me to draw them and share their story. It just feels like a real honour to be able to do that. And Lily, keep up the great work. They're wonderful portraits. So thank you for sharing it with the world.
Well, thank you.
Lily Emo there.
Thank you for the panel. I love it.
Pleasure to have you on.
You're wonderful, Lily. You're wonderful.
The COVID-19 Portraits Project. Just a flash here too, and you'll hear more about this at Checkpoint. Air New Zealand can confirm that in total 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19. That again, Air New Zealand can confirm that in total 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19. But look, on this COVID-19 Portraits Project, Alan, I can see this in the future actually being part of a collection, say, that will be exhibited at something like the National Portraits Gallery in Wellington. There's such good portraits, and they're such a snapshot of a particular time, huh?
Oh, no, absolutely. And, they're fantastic portraits, and they are portraits of, I've said it before, heroes, people who are going above and beyond our expectations, I guess, by simply doing their jobs. And, I think they're absolutely amazing people. There's so many people out there, we don't know their names, they're not on the media every day and stuff like that. But again, you're right. I think once this is all over, hopefully we're going to acknowledge all of these people who did, such amazing things during such an unprecedented period in our history. So, hats off to them. They're just amazing people. And these portraits are beautiful.
Well, Alan, I so support that. I think COVID-19 has been a real leveller. When we think about portraits, we think about important people with fancy titles. But you know who the real heroes are? It's the doctors, it's the nurses, it's supermarket attendants. It's people who clean our places. It's the people who deliver food. It's all of the people who we never looked at twice and never said thank you to. So I just think Lily's done an amazing thing.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. Thank you for your lovely words there. May Chen and Alan Blackman, thank you very much for being part of the panel this afternoon. I'm back tomorrow from 3:45. Checkpoint is next. Have a good evening. See you then.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, angry customers grounded by COVID-19 demand their money back from Air New Zealand, saying they need it more than the company does. Last week it was Randon supermarket customers. Now a sample of Air New Zealand's international crew, pilots and airport workers will be tested for coronavirus. And Air New Zealand has tonight confirmed 30 of its staff have been infected with COVID-19. Soggy face masks likely led to 3 Canterbury health workers being infected with the virus. And COVID-19 kills funding for a lung cancer drug. The health sector is groaning under the weight of the pandemic, with doctors, dentists and pharmacists all crying out for help.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. $30 million is going into funding food parcels and emergency accommodation due to COVID-19. Demand for food parcels has climbed 9-fold in some areas, and the Auckland City Mission estimates 1 in 5 New Zealanders are going hungry. The Civil Defence Minister, Penny Henare, says the government is committed to meeting the urgent need out there. Pharmac has frozen plans to fund a lung cancer drug that would have helped at least 1,400 patients a year, saying it can no longer afford to make the investment. The move has dashed hopes that Keytruda would soon be publicly funded for lung cancer, New Zealand's biggest cancer killer. Pharmac had planned to ask drug companies to pitch their products and prices, but has put that on hold. The chief executive, Sarah Fitt, says Pharmac is concerned about rising drug prices worldwide in the COVID-19 pandemic and couldn't commit to funding the drug now, but still hopes to in the future. The Lung Foundation's chief executive, Philip Hope, says many cancer patients will be devastated and feel they were given false hope. Checkpoint has more on Keytruda after the news. Pharmacies are warning many may be forced to shut if they don't get more government funding as they grapple with higher costs and slower sales under lockdown. Representatives from across the health sector painted a bleak picture for MPs this morning, appearing before the Epidemic Response Committee. The Pharmacy Guild's chief executive, Andrew Gowden, says the sector received an initial $15 million of funding, but it's not enough.
This is delicate, pressing and urgent and needs attention immediately. We thought it needed attention 3 weeks ago. We're pulling our hair out.
Andrew Gowden says their calls have fallen on deaf ears, with neither the Health Minister nor Director General of Health making themselves available to talk. The Director General of Health is reviewing the 14-day quarantine exemption for Air New Zealand staff when they return from overseas. Staff are increasingly uneasy about the risks to both them and the public. 35 have tested positive for the coronavirus, including one linked to the Bluff wedding cluster, the country's biggest, with 98 people infected. Ashley Bloomfield says the circumstances of each of these cases is different and many happened before the lockdown.
We are reviewing and looking very closely at the more recent cases and what the current risk is, particularly when they are sort of on their downtime in one of those 3 destinations that Air New Zealand is flying to, and what else could be done to ensure that they are kept safe there and also that there is appropriate protection for them and for passengers.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. 1 new death and 6 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported in New Zealand in 24 hours. The latest death was a woman in her 80s from the Rosewood Rest Home cluster in Christchurch, where 7 others have died. The death toll from the coronavirus is now 14. The total number of COVID-19 infections is now 1,451, of which 1,036 have recovered. In news just a hand, a man has been charged with murder after a man's body was found in an Auckland brothel last month. The police were called to the Gentlemen's Club in the early hours of March the 10th. Detective Inspector Glenn Baldwin says a 60-year-old man was arrested today. He's expected to appear in the Auckland District Court tomorrow charged with murder. That news just a hand. And a man is in a standoff with armed police after barricading himself in a house in East Auckland. The police say the man threatened members of the public on Jeffs Road in Flatbush before shutting himself inside and threatening officers. The man has been refusing to leave the property despite police efforts to negotiate. Cordons are in place and members of the public should avoid the area. The police say armed officers are at the scene as a precaution. It's coming up to 4 minutes past 5. In sport this afternoon, leading golf professional Ryan Fox can't wait to get back on the course as the sport readies for a return in New Zealand in the wake of the coronavirus crisis. No sport has been allowed under the Level 4 lockdown, but golf will be permitted in a restricted form when the country moves back to Level 3 early next week. Fox, who plays on the European Tour but has stuck at home in Auckland for the last 4 weeks, says he'll be up for a game as soon as he can.
It'll just be nice to get out, and I think it'll be good for a lot of people's mental health after 4 weeks of not being able to do something, and although, golf can be a frustrating game for the mental health side of things as well. Ryan
Fox. Guidelines on golf under Level 3 are expected to be known by tomorrow. And the New Zealand men's Olympic football squad have written an impassioned letter to the national body as the future of the team's coaches reportedly comes under threat. The group has disappointed New Zealand football under financial pressure because of the COVID-19 enforced lockdown may axe some or all of the Ollie White's coaching team. And that's the news. This Saturday morning, a special Anzac Day Standard Dawn service to remember the sacrifice of others in service of our country. Wherever you are in the world, stand with us and take a moment to remember our fallen during the dawn service, which includes 1 minute silence and a special Anzac address by the Defence and Veterans Minister, Ron Mark. Our standard dawn service, hosted by Shannon Honui Thompson, starts at 6 a.m. Saturday, with coverage starting from 10 to 6 on RNZ National. We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast through to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. For Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine for the rest of today. Scattered showers or drizzle developing tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including central high country, fine apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine. Isolated showers developing in Gisborne for some time today and Wairarapa from tomorrow afternoon. Hortowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough. Fine today, scattered rain or showers developing tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and mainland Southland, mainly fine with high cloud. However, scattered rain about Southland and Otago at times and a few spots possible in South Canterbury. Buller, Westland, Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine with some cloud. It's 6 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, Air New Zealand has confirmed 30 staff have tested positive for COVID-19. More on that shortly, but first, I think they're despicable. That from a dissatisfied Air New Zealand customer, and Steve Clark is not alone. Other customers are outraged the airline is holding on to their money after COVID-19 basically grounded their flights. Money some of them now really need to make ends meet. Hundreds of Air New Zealand flights have been cancelled or moved, and increased border restrictions and alert levels due to the pandemic mean some travellers can't even get to their takeoff point. But a number of Air New Zealand customers say the airline is refusing to give their money back. Instead, they're being offered credits they may never get to use. And Ros, Steve and Deborah say that's bad form from a company that's benefited from $70 million in wage subsidies and a government loan of up to $900 million.
So I'm Ros. I'm a New Zealand citizen, but I live in Tasmania. And I was going to New Zealand from Tasmania actually on the 9th of April, which is obviously gone, with a different airline. And then when I got to New Zealand, I was flying from Auckland to Tonga on the 24th of April to meet my sister, who's working for Volunteer Service Abroad in Tonga. So I was flying from Auckland to Tonga. I was going to be in Tonga for a week and then fly back to Auckland, then back to Tasmania.
Hi, I'm Steve Clark, and I had 3 tickets to, my family had 3 tickets to LA on the 25th, to go on the 25th of the 5th.
With Air New Zealand?
Yeah, with Air New Zealand, yeah.
I'm Deborah. We were due to fly on the 5th of June to Perth. So we live in Picton. We were going to fly from Blenheim to Auckland and then Auckland to Perth.
With Air New Zealand?
With Air New Zealand. We were headed there specifically to do a cruise that was to leave from Perth on the 8th of June. So we thought we'd have a few days to look around in Perth before the cruise. And then, of course, the cruise was cancelled because of COVID-19. And, of course, our trip via air has been cancelled too, because you can't fly in out of anywhere and you can't land anywhere.
How much were your tickets with Air New Zealand?
The New Zealand component from Auckland to Tonga is just under $800.
$2,000.
$2,206 to be exact.
Okay, so what have you been told about those flights? Can you get your money back?
Tasmania had shut our borders, so I couldn't get out of Tasmania. That was my big issue, even if the flights were still operating, which Air New Zealand wrote back and said, well, our flights haven't been cancelled. You can still go to Tonga. Therefore, the flight isn't cancelled. We can't do anything for you. That was the first email I had from them. And I said, well, even if I can go even if I could get there, even if I could swim, I can't get there because our borders are closed. I then received 2 days later an email saying that those flights had been cancelled and they were offering me a credit note for a month later, for May. I think it was May 29th from memory. And I wrote back and said, well, that's no good to me. I'm actually going over for a birthday party, a 65th birthday party, which I was, before I went to Tonga, and I would prefer a cash refund. And They wrote back and said, please call this number. I've called that number 3 times. There's a 1-800 number, and then there's also a 13, like a 6-digit number. I've rung both of them, and each time I've spoken to somebody who's told me, sorry, we can't help you, we are only offering credit notes. My comment was, well, the credit note does me no good because the birthday party, the 65th that I'm going over for, will be no longer. And my sister has been repatriated from Tonga, so flying to Tonga is of no use to me at all.
So they've indicated, they've said that they're just going to give you a credit on your airfares, but they're not really clear on what you can use your credit for. I've heard other people saying that you can only use your credit for for those where you are going. You can't use it for domestic flight around New Zealand, so I'm not really sure. But 100% they've said that you will not get a refund.
We got an email from them to say it's been cancelled. And then I was just actually looking online to try and retrieve our booking. And it says we are holding your booking in credit and are working on functionality to enable you to rebook online. So I can't even get into that booking to see. And I've also just logged into our Air New Zealand Airpoints page, and there's no record of that flight anywhere. So we haven't actually been sent an email to say that they're holding it in credit or how it can be used, nothing. And I have been messaging Air New Zealand to try and get that information, and they just don't even answer the messages.
So how would you describe the communication you've had with them?
They've been quite difficult. I mean, obviously, the people on the end of the telephone, it's not their fault, but they just sing the party song. They just say, I'm sorry, this is our, what do they say? This is our procedure, and we can't do anything about it. And I said, well, these are exceptional circumstances. Your procedure really should then take into account, people's exceptional circumstances. I also quoted something called the frustrated contract, which is, I don't know if you know about that, but that means that if a contract is broken by both parties through no ability of them to change it, legally you are entitled to a refund.
Oh, I feel like that they're trying to portray this image that they love us, they're part of the New Zealand family, we're all in this together. They've taken billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars from the government in subsidies as far as, the employee subsidy plus money the government's put into them to keep them going, and yet they're holding, I understand, maybe almost $1 billion of Kiwis' money when they most need it to help them, buy food, pay rent, and basically living expenses from day to day. They're using, working Kiwis' money to keep their business afloat.
So you need...
I think that they're being despicable. We're all affected, as far as work goes. And, we need it back to pay for everyday living expenses. And I'm not a shareholder of Air New Zealand, and I don't see why I should have to have money, give them a free loan, basically, to keep them afloat. I mean, if they're that financially strapped, perhaps they should go back to their shareholders who've been reaping the benefits for many years from, all the profits, rather than tapping mums and dads and, average Kiwis at a time when they most need their money back.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Every time I've rung the 0800 numbers to try and sort out, what we can do with this credit, we get told a different thing. So we've been told that we can use it we have to use it in the next 12 months from the time the booking was made. So our booking was made in February. So that message said that we needed to use it by the February next year, which we said to them, well, that's not reasonable because we don't even know if international travel will be available by then, and we probably won't be in a position to be able to afford to fly internationally in that time frame. And then they said you have to use that flight for the same route again. So I said, what? So we have to fly from Blenheim to Auckland and then Auckland to Perth? That's the only way we can redeem that credit? Which they said yes. So then we asked, well, can we hold that value of that credit to use it domestically once domestic travel is allowed around New Zealand. And they said, no, you can't. You can only use it for the international flight that you had booked. We were doing this cruise as a little bit of a treat before I had my next two big surgeries, which were due to happen sort of, July, August. But of course they're on hold because of COVID-19 and the hospitals are not operating. And so I don't know when my surgery is going to happen, but it will be within the next 12 months. And both surgeries will probably be at least 6 to 8 months apart. So therefore, travel for me is just not going to be an option,
To sum it up, how do you feel about Air New Zealand right now and the way you're being treated?
Look, I understand people are hurting all over the place, but they've made good profits over the years. Air New Zealand's always been very much in the black, haven't they? Well, so they've boasted. We take the good and the bad times. With my work, I'm suffering too. I can't work at the moment. $800 in the great scheme of things is not a lot of money, but there is a principle as well.
They're all very good, all good at going on to Instagram and Facebook and putting all this rhetoric up about how they love us and all the rest of it. We're all in this together, but the reality is that they don't. It's all about money. It's all about profits. It's all about their survival, and they don't care one little bit about the average New Zealander who's lost millions, hundreds of millions of dollars potentially with air tickets. And the thing is that it wasn't as though that us Kiwis decided, we're not going to fly because there's a coronavirus. No, they decided to cancel all these international flights for monetary reasons and because obviously, you can't travel anyway. And so we didn't, it wasn't as though that we cancelled our flight and said we didn't want to go. They cancelled the flight on us. For whatever reason, they still cancelled the flight. They downsized their business so that the international flight was no longer available. So I don't see why we shouldn't be able to get our money back.
Disgusted, to be honest. Yeah. We sort of feel that they should, in this circumstance, they should be refunding people's money if they need the money. And, we need the money because finances are tight. We can't travel. We're not in a situation we won't even be in a situation, even if I wasn't having the surgeries, because we won't even be able to afford an international holiday. That's the last thing that will be on our list of being able to afford in the next 12 months or even probably in the next 2 years.
And that was Air New Zealand customers Ros, Steve and Deborah, who all want refunds for their flights. Air New Zealand declined to be interviewed, but in a statement says it's crediting or refunding customer tickets according to the fare bought and the country it was bought in. It says it's helping customers rebook through until June 30th. Air New Zealand has extended credits accrued due to COVID-19 changes, and people will now have until the 30th of June 2021 to book, and then a further 12 months to travel, the airline says. It says it's received great feedback on its flight credit option, and 240,000 people have opted to put their flights into credit. After 6 tonight, we'll be joined by Consumer NZ, so if you've got any specific questions about your flights and cancellations, text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Guidelines exempting Air New Zealand flight crew from a 14-day stand-down following international flights are being reviewed and a further risk assessment carried out to see if more can be done to keep them safe. At the moment, Kiwis or permanent residents returning home from overseas must go into isolation or quarantine at a government-managed facility for 14 days. Currently, more than 2,400 people are in those facilities or hotels, among them 97 people who are quarantined with symptoms. Last night, Checkpoint revealed some Air New Zealand crew are worried the lack of stand-down between flights is putting them, their families and the public at risk, particularly after a flight attendant who later tested positive for the coronavirus attended a wedding in Bluff, and that wedding has now become our biggest COVID cluster. That cluster and about 40% of all COVID cases in New Zealand are linked to overseas travel. In the past half hour, Air New Zealand has confirmed 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19. The Prime Minister was asked if she had concerns about those numbers this afternoon.
When it comes to aircrew, of course, you can imagine how difficult it would be to implement a regime where every time someone went for and fulfilled a shift at work, they then had to stay home for 2 weeks. But what we do need to make sure is that we have protocols in place that protect that workforce and the people around them. What I want to do as we get to a position of continuing to see smaller and smaller numbers coming in, and as we see those flight numbers drop, just reassess again that all of the protocols we've got around alongside health, around our air crew are appropriate. But to date, they have had exemptions because of the expectations of protections in place for them while they are working.
So just a quick additional comment. I had a quite detailed memo last night from my border team who are working very closely with Air New Zealand, their Chief Medical Officer, because they are reviewing all those protocols and what has been happening with their crew. In particular, the three international destinations are still flying to, which is western seaboard of the US, Shanghai and Hong Kong. And there are different arrangements at each, and they're doing a risk assessment to look at what else they can do to help protect their crew and, of course, to make sure that there's no breach in the border when those people come back into New Zealand. So there'll be updated advice and even increased scrutiny of the procedures in place to help make sure we are not importing any cases through that avenue.
Documents obtained by Checkpoint also show there's concern about Ministry of Health guidelines being broken by crew while on international layovers. And this week, Air New Zealand confirmed crew returning from Vancouver were forced to self-isolate after allegedly breaching protocols. Air New Zealand says while 30 employees have tested positive for COVID-19, not all of them are cabin crew. Our political reporter Joe Moyer asked Ashley Bloomfield about the situation this afternoon.
Many of those date from pre the lockdown period. But just to reiterate, we are reviewing and looking very closely at the more recent cases and what the current risk is for those staff, particularly when they are sort of on their downtime in one of those three destinations that Air New Zealand is flying to, and what the arrangements are there on the ground, and what else could be done to ensure that they are kept safe there, and also that there is appropriate protection for them and for passengers during the flights, and then what needs to happen when they do come on shore.
I imagine you can think of the difficulty, of course, is that this is these individual stewards' line of work, that if every time they work a shift they're required to then isolate, that becomes very difficult, both for the airline and for them. Same made then question, why aren't they then required that whenever they're not working to be only able to be at home? Again, there are issues attached with that as well. That means that for many, many months we could have stewards who wouldn't be able to ever leave their home. So there are issues that we have to work through here, but we're very, very aware of the fact that generally the border is a vulnerability that we have to make sure we have really watertight arrangements around, but that we're also looking after the well-being of those workers.
As mentioned, we did invite Air New Zealand onto the program again this evening, but they once again declined. In a statement, Air New Zealand says international aircrew and airport staff who aren't showing any signs of COVID will be tested for the virus this week. Air New Zealand says the 30 staff who have tested positive are not all crew and not all of them were infected through work. 25 have since recovered and 5 are still recovering at home. Air New Zealand says it hasn't had a positive case in the past 12 days. It is 24 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that issue. Let us know if you're having any problems with cancelled flights, refunds or credits. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The health sector is groaning under the weight of COVID-19, with doctors, dentists and pharmacists crying out for help from the government. Union representatives have been scathing of the government's support for the sector so far, painting a bleak picture for MPs on the Epidemic Response Committee this morning. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Health workers have been touted as the front line against COVID-19, the Prime Minister praising them for their essential service. Today they lined up to say thanks is not enough. They need money.
We don't know whether some practices are going to survive this.
Kate Baddock heads up the Medical Association, the voice of doctors around the country. She says many GPs are struggling to make ends meet. Despite the country being in a health crisis, the number of patients seeking appointments has dramatically dropped. and GPs' incomes along with it.
That cash flow which funds payroll, it funds our staffing requirements, is just not there. Quite literally, is just not there. And so the ability for general practice to stay afloat in this kind of environment is very, very unlikely in lots of cases.
The government has provided a cash injection of $15 million to cover the cost of shifting to virtual appointments, $8 million to help with testing, and then another $22 million after that, $45 million in total. But doctors say they were promised another payment of $22 million and were told this week it's not coming.
They have reneged on that expectation, and the final tranche has not been forwarded to general practice.
We have recognised the costs they've faced and we have worked hard to try and support them as well.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has refused to explain why that second payment of $22 million is not forthcoming, but she insists GPs have not been left in the lurch, pointing out they also have access to the wage subsidy scheme.
I do not think $45 million is an insignificant sum when we think about the support we're trying to provide across all of New Zealand, including businesses across all of New Zealand.
Others in the health sector also crying out for help. Community pharmacies warn they too could be forced to shut. Their costs have gone up, but sales have dropped right away.
This is delicate, pressing and urgent and needs attention immediately. We thought it needed attention 3 weeks ago. We're pulling our hair out.
The Pharmacy Guild's chief executive, Andrew Gordon, says their calls have fallen on deaf ears, with neither the Health Minister nor Director General of Health making themselves available. He acknowledges an initial $15 million of support, but says it's not enough.
The numbers don't stack up. I'm a chartered accountant. I'll tell you now, pharmacies are in the red ink, and it's only a matter of time before the dominoes start to fall and they can't pay their creditors, they can't pay their bills for staff, they can't pay the bills for rental.
The plight is even worse for dentists whose doors are shut during the lockdown, apart from for emergency care. And the Dental Association's president, Dr. Katie Ayers, says apart from the wage subsidy, they've received no extra funding. 1 in 8 practices, she says, have already laid off staff.
While it's hoped that most small businesses in New Zealand will survive another 3 weeks of closure, already some dental practices are facing bankruptcy.
All 3 professions, doctors, dentists and pharmacists, spoke of difficulties securing protective equipment, such as masks, at various times. They also spoke of confusing and poor communication from the ministry. But most of all, they want more government support. The country in the grips of a health crisis, but the health sector hurting too. For Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
The Canterbury District Health Boards pointed to soggy face masks as the probable cause of 3 COVID-19 cases among its workers. The staff are connected to the deadly Rosewood Rest Home cluster, and the Health Board's been investigating how the virus was able to infect them. But it's prompted a fresh wave of criticism about how the Health Board is handling its PPE supplies. Katie Todd reports.
The staff tested positive for COVID-19 last week after caring for patients from Rosewood Rest Home and Hospital and helping shift some of them to Burwood Hospital. In a statement, Incident Controller Dr. Sue Nightingale says a PPE breach is the most likely reason for their infection. She says on April the 6th and 7th, when patients were shifted out of Rosewood, some staff were unable to change their PPE as frequently as recommended, and it became damp.
It was not always easy for them to interrupt care for very unwell dependent patients in order to change PPE as frequently as recommended. Some staff reported their PPE had become moist with the physical exertion that occurred over some hours that day. This factor is likely to have led to exposure to COVID-19.
At that time, RNZ understands staff only had access to paper surgical masks rather than the full filter N95 masks. More than a week later, on April the 15th, the Health Board moved to provide them with N95 masks and visors. It's now introduced a buddy system to ensure staff use PPE correctly, including changing it at least every 2 hours, and Dr. Nightingale says there are good stocks of PPE. But the nurses' organisation says the Health Board staff should have had the proper PPE gear from the get-go. It's kai whakahaere, Kerry Nuku, says the union's members were speaking out about a supply shortage and gowns that ripped for a week before anything changed, with some even talking to the media. She interprets the Health Board's statement today as effectively blaming the staff for not changing their PPE regularly enough, which she says is unfair.
Our members for a long time now have been raising concerns about the quality PPE gear that wasn't available to them. So it's unfair to lay the blame at the fact of these nursing staff not having the availability or not changing regularly when actually there wasn't the stock available or the quality of stock to make them feel comfortable and be safe at work.
Kerry Nuku says employers have an obligation under the Health and Safety at Work Act to ensure that staff are kept safe when they use PPE gear. But exactly who should get what PPE gear isn't always clear-cut. Since providing the N95 masks, Canterbury District Health Board has told staff in Burwood Hospital they aren't actually needed for clinical reasons, but can be used if they're more comfortable. And that's a concern for Mark Thomas, an Associate Professor at the University of Auckland's School of Medical Sciences and an Auckland District Health Board member.
When there is a genuine reason for somebody to be wearing personal protective equipment, then they should be wearing the full kit that's required, not just part of it. And this sort of sloppiness of, oh yes, if you feel like it, then you should use it, with regard to N95 masks, helps to weaken that clear message of what staff should be doing when they are at risk.
Canterbury District Health Board's PPE problems have also stirred up uncertainty elsewhere in the community. Dorothy's mother is in a wing of Burwood Hospital separate from the Rosewood patients, but she's now having trouble trusting its ability to contain COVID-19.
Well, I just read the news article this morning and, got a wee bit upset by that because it's like they're saying that the protective equipment that the nurses and the staff are wearing aren't up to code. And that's worrying for someone who has a mum in hospital that's a very vulnerable person anyway.
The nurses' organisation says it's watching health boards to ensure PPE supplies remain plentiful as winter flu season approaches. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the government is following up any complaints that not enough PPE is reaching frontline health workers. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Pharmac pulls out of a plan to fund Keytruda for lung cancer patients. The devastating Sky City fire that took 10 days to put out is ruled an accident. And buckle up, we'll tell you which fast foods will be open and at what time next Tuesday. We'd love your feedback, particularly on Air New Zealand and PPE. You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But let's get to the headlines now with Paul Brennan.
Thanks, Lisa. Pharmac has frozen plans to fund a lung cancer drug that would have helped at least 1,400 patients a year, saying it can no longer afford to make the investment. The move has dashed hopes that Keytruda would soon be publicly funded to tackle New Zealand's biggest cancer killer. Pharmacies are warning many may be forced to shut if they don't get more government funding as they struggle with higher costs and lower sales under lockdown. The Pharmacy Guild's chief executive says the sector received an initial $15 million, but that is not enough. The government will fund $30 million worth of food parcels and emergency accommodation due to COVID-19. Demand for food parcels has climbed ninefold in some areas, and the Auckland City Mission estimates 1 in 5 New Zealanders are going hungry. The Director-General of Health is reviewing the 14-day quarantine exemption for Air New Zealand staff when they return from overseas. 30 flight attendants have tested positive for the virus, and workers are increasingly uneasy about the risks to both them and the public. There are 6 new cases of COVID-19 in the country today and 1 death. A man is in custody tonight after barricading himself in a house in Auckland during a standoff with police. The police say the man threatened members of the public on Jeffs Road in Flatbush before shutting himself inside and threatening officers. He was arrested shortly after 5 o'clock. A man has been charged with murder after a man's body was found at an Auckland brothel last month. The 60-year-old was arrested today and is expected to appear in the Auckland District Court tomorrow. And nearly 4 in 10 Pacifica are living in overcrowded houses compared to just 2.7% of the total population. Stats NZ says the pandemic prompted it to release the information early as cramped conditions increase the risk of disease spreading. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome back to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Let's go to business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the specialist dairy company A2 Milk, it's getting a bit of a windfall boost to sales. Why is that?
Well, apparently there's a great deal of demand, and I guess just like people wanted toilet paper in New Zealand, they want infant formula in China. So they've been buying it up and I guess stocking up as much as they can, and that's driven up the prices. And at the same time, the company's costs have gone down because they're not traveling there and so forth. So overall, it's made a significant impact on its bottom line.
And I imagine the market liked that.
No, they certainly did. Looking at their price, it was up 1.5%. Now, it probably would have done a bit better, but overall, our market was down 1.1% today. That's 118 points to 10,418. And that's really that lingering concern about oil prices again and just general weakness about where things are heading.
So dairy prices have fallen to their lowest level in more than a year. I mean, how much have they dropped over that time?
Yeah, well, the latest prices showed that the average price of the global dairy auction would happened overnight was 4.2% down to $2,836 a ton. These numbers, the big number isn't as important as the whole milk powder, which really determines the payout for our local farmers, and that fell 3.9% to $2,707 a ton. And that's the weakest level since January, and it's just below the break-even point for many farmers. So we're going to have to keep a good eye on that, find out what's happening. It's kind of in contrast to what we're hearing, of course, with the infant baby formula.
Absolutely. Well, you gave us a bit of a taster for how the markets went today, but the bigger picture in the dollar?
Yeah, the dollar, well, we fell a bit. Just a little bit more than we were yesterday at 59.6 US cents, 94.6 Australian, and 48.5 British pence. And tomorrow's another day.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Pelsier with our business news this afternoon. Pharmac has pulled out of a plan to fund a lung cancer drug that would have helped at least 1,400 patients a year, saying it can no longer afford to make the investment. The move has dashed hopes that Keytruda would be soon publicly funded for lung cancer, New Zealand's biggest cancer killer. RNZ has obtained documents showing that Pharmac had planned to offer a request for proposals, or RFP, where drug companies are asked to pitch their products and prices, but has pulled out on budget grounds. Chief Executive Sarah Fitt has told RNZ that Pharmac is concerned about rising drug prices worldwide in the COVID-19 pandemic, and so has put funding for the drug on hold, but hopes to revisit that in the future. But lung cancer patients and their advocates are devastated and say they have been given a false hope. Investigative journalist Guyon Espiner has the story.
Michelle James is 57 years old and has been on Keytruda since January last year. She and her partner have had to sell their Wanaka house to fund Keytruda because Pharmac doesn't.
Thinking positive is the best thing, and just try and keep laughing and try and see the positive thing. And, you know, when we put the house in the market, that was the biggest kick in the guts. We worked hard all our lives and got to build our own house.
Her partner Clive estimates they've spent $110,000 on the drug.
We are the lucky ones because Keytruda for Michelle has worked and is still working. And the reality is that money and houses and everything, they're just sticks and stones. Michelle's still alive.
Lung cancer takes about 1,800 lives a year in New Zealand, more than breast cancer, prostate cancer and melanoma combined. Those who need Keytruda have to fund it themselves.
We're not worried about us. It's all the other people that don't have the money to be able to do it, and we'll have to go down the horrible road of chemo and radio, and their poor families and poor them, and it's just absolutely horrible.
Lung Foundation Chief Executive Philip Hope said Pharmac wrote to the organisation in September last year, saying they were preparing an RFP for drug companies to pitch prices and products to fund the drug. This week he got a letter from Chief Executive Sarah Fitt saying things had changed. Pharmac didn't have the money.
What we now have is 30 lung cancer patients continuing to die prematurely every week, and you have to ask yourself, you know, is that acceptable?
Sarah Fitt said funding a drug like Keytruda for lung cancer would have cost hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 5 years, and Pharmac could not commit to that given the COVID-19 outbreak.
There's been quite significant impacts on manufacturing and supply chains, and we're already seeing significant price increases coming through. Freight, as you can imagine, with the sort of airline situation, freight is becoming a huge issue. So it's actually getting stuff into the country is proving challenging, but also the costs associated with it.
She said there was now a lot of uncertainty over the Pharmac budget because medicine costs were rising due to supply issues in the pandemic.
There are obviously products that have been used, in much bigger quantities overseas, particularly, say, in intensive care. So, the availability of those products reduces, the price goes up.
She said Pharmac now had growing concerns about maintaining the supply of medicines into New Zealand.
We're worried about the impact with the air freight. I think we're starting to see that impact on the aviation industry globally, and that's going to have an impact on medicines that we fly into the country from overseas.
The backdown comes despite Pharmac's expert committee on cancer treatments recommending last April that Keytruda be funded as a high priority. The committee said that both health-related quality of life and overall survival results were clinically meaningful for affected patients. Malcolm Mulholland of Patient Voice Aotearoa said it was rare for Pharmac to commit to engaging in an RFP and then to pull the plug.
They have very much given false hope to lung cancer patients, especially when you look at the numbers involved. I mean, there are some 1,400 patients that could potentially have their lives extended for 5 years or more by the funding of this drug.
Michelle's partner Clive is angry with Pharmac and its chief executive.
I have never once heard her or her silent chairman get up and stand up in front of the government and say, we need this more money because we want to fund these immunotherapy drugs and all the other drugs that are out there. We need to fund this. We need more money. We need more money. And yet, all of a sudden, the government can find billions of dollars to help with the COVID.
Michelle says Keytruda is working well and that the alternatives were unbearable.
Having chemo, I would have lost my hair, I would have lost weight. They only gave me 7 to 12 months. Well, I would have been dead by now anyway, so you're lucky I'm talking to you.
And likely to be talking for some time yet.
I'm not going to let it get me. I'll get it before it gets me.
But as for getting Keytruda for lung patients on the public purse, Pharmac says that's now on hold. It wants to fund it but can't afford it and can't say when that will change. For Checkpoint, ko Guy and Espina tēnei.
The devastating Sky City International Convention Centre fire that burned for 3 days last year has been ruled an accident. The convention centre's roof, a Fletcher building construction site, ignited on an otherwise normal working day in Auckland CBD last October. The smoke lingered over the city for weeks as investigators began to dig to the bottom of how it all started. Annika Smith reports.
At its peak, about 150 firefighters worked to put out the blaze, which took 10 days to fully extinguish. Roads around the Sky Tower were closed and covered in firefighting hoses, while the nearby Auckland District Court and local businesses shut their doors. All because, according to fire and emergency investigators, a worker's blowtorch was exposed to roofing material. Fire and Emergencies Te Hiku Region Manager Ron Devlin says it was an accident.
The fire was caused inadvertently while the top capping of the membrane was being torched onto the roof at that point where the fire started, and it inadvertently set light to the inner core of the roll.
The findings bring an end to speculation last year that a young worker had left a blowtorch on and went for lunch. Today's report says there were no inexperienced contractors working in the area at the time, and all gas bottles near the origin of the fire were turned off for the lunch break. Ron Devlin says the sheer density and height of the roof structure made it a difficult fire to fight.
To be able to tackle the fire from underneath, we had something like 17 metres between the kind of floor and the top of the ceiling. So very difficult to tackle a fire like that safely.
It took 10 days for the fire to be fully extinguished, after which Sky City was forced to bow out of hosting next year's APEC summit. Both Sky City and Fletcher Construction cashed out tens of millions of dollars in insurance for the damage done to the convention centre. Fletcher's chief executive, Peter Reedy, said in a statement he was pleased the fire was ruled an accident.
There was a lot of speculation in the days following the fire, but as we said at the time, investigations require a methodical and systematic process to determine the cause. Our own investigators have come to a similar conclusion to Fire and Emergency New Zealand, that the source of the fire was the inadvertent ignition of the cardboard centre of a roll of waterproofing membrane.
Mr. Reedy said the product is extremely common across the industry and the subcontractors working on the roof had 40 years of experience between them. The Fire and Emergency report also found a fire at another building in November involved a similar roofing material, but it was quickly put out. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff says while it's a relief the fire was accidental, the construction industry would have to take greater care in the future. He says the city only had to look at London's catastrophic Grenfell Tower fire in 2017 to realise why it was so important to keep improving building standards.
I think that if anything, we have to continually upgrade the standards in the Building Code and the Building Act to ensure that we minimise the prospect of both severe damage and even worse, loss of life. Unfortunately, in this instance, there was no loss of life.
Mr. Goff says work is underway to identify an alternative venue for APEC, which he says should still go ahead in Auckland next year, pending COVID-19 border restrictions. I tāmaki makoto, mō te hōtaka o te yahi nei, ko Annika Smith-Aho.
It's 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We have been swamped by your feedback regarding Air New Zealand offering credits and not refunds. In fact, many of you are telling us you didn't get a choice. Your feedback and Consumer New Zealand coming up. But community healthcare providers say the government has shortchanged them during the COVID-19 crisis and it's putting extra strain on their services. The Medical Association says GPs may lose their jobs, while the College of Midwives says community-based midwives have just been ignored altogether when it comes to additional support. Timothy Brown has more.
So far, general practices have received $37 million in direct government funding, and an additional $8 million has gone to DHBs to support community practices during the Level 4 lockdown. But the Medical Association says it was expecting another $22 million this week, funding which is much needed after consultations dropped by 50 to 80% overnight due to the pandemic. The association's chair, Dr. Kate Baddock, says without the money, GPs will lose their jobs and community healthcare services will be affected just when they're needed the most.
We are in danger of not having the workforce that we will need and do need now, but we'll need even more when we come out of lockdown. So we have a problem that although virtual consultations are charged, many are not charging perhaps the normal amount because they understand that many of the patients actually don't have jobs currently.
Dr. Baddock says general practices rely on cash flow and deferring or reducing payments means they will struggle to pay staff. She says the $22 million was indicated and expected.
It had not been promised, but there was absolutely the expectation that it would be forthcoming. And many practices had been functioning and working toward Level 3 and Level 2 subsequently, on the expectation that that money would be coming through so that we would be able to retain contracted doctors so that they would be there when the expected deluge back into general practice does occur.
But community-based midwives have received no additional funding during the COVID-19 outbreak and subsequent lockdown. The College of Midwives Chief Executive, Alison Eddy, says she's baffled and disappointed by the government's response. The college's COVID-19 liaison, Catherine Redfeld, says midwives had to buy their own PPE in the early stages of the lockdown.
There was no PPE provided to community midwives. They had to provide it for themselves. And that was a real difficulty because it wasn't so very readily available. And what was available was very, very pricey.
Catherine Redfeld says midwives were doing 26% more work than they were funded for, before the lockdown. But that's been further compounded by mothers being discharged earlier from hospital after giving birth, increasing home births, and the need to fill gaps left by the withdrawal or reduction of other services.
We do feel unrecognised and unsupported and unrecompensed, really, for the continuing work that we're doing and the increased work that we're doing. And we'd just like the government to prioritise our requests for additional support.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the Health Minister is working to ensure funding is available for costs incurred across the sector.
All we've needed to do is make sure, of course, that for the COVID-related response that we are meeting COVID-related costs. And so sometimes that takes a little bit to work through, but I'll leave that to our Health Minister. He's having to work across the health sector to identify where there have been COVID-specific related costs. I know it's been difficult for our midwives.
However, Ms Ardern batted back suggestions that GPs were given false assurances about further funding.
I don't think $45 million is false hope. I think it's support and much needed support.
The Health Minister, David Clark, rejected RNZ's request for an interview on the subject and instead, in a statement, reiterated the $45 million mentioned by the Prime Minister and said discussions around further funding are ongoing. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Māori leaders are backing calls for the government to lift the ban on hunting during Alert Level 3, but only to whānau who rely on it to feed themselves. Hunting is currently prohibited under Alert Level 4 due to the risk it poses if someone hurts themselves and needs to call emergency services. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
For avid hunters, there's nothing quite like the sound of a wild pig or stag in the open bush. And under normal circumstances, that's exactly what thousands of hunters in New Zealand would be searching for this month, with sika deer, fallow bucks and other wildlife in abundance during April. The government has yet to make its mind up on whether or not it will lift the hunting ban from next week. But hunters like Pānia Te Paiho Marsh, who rely on hunting to cut costs, are hoping it will.
It's a monetary thing. So me and my husband, we have 5 children. And as you know, food is very, very, very expensive. So the ngahere to us is quintessentially a pātaka. So that's what takes the bit of that financial stress off. And that is the majority of hunters hunt for that exact reason. And we have been doing this for a while now, this pandemic buzz. So a lot of our freezers are starting to run a bit dry.
She's not the only one who wants hunting restrictions lifted during Alert Level 3. The New Zealand Pig Hunting Association has even proposed conditions for hunters to mitigate any risk, such as only hunting within the region they live and having a detailed safety plan, including a log of anyone they come into contact with. But Ms Marsh says many hunters are still confused about the risk and believe going to the supermarket is far more risky than gathering food out in the bush.
For us personally, we feel more at risk going to Pakistan and standing in a line with 50 people that we don't know. We've just popped all their bubbles. As much as we try and do the social distancing, than we ever would going up to the bush and getting us a feed and filling up freezers. So it's kind of we're all kind of wondering, what's the reasoning?
Eastern Bay of Plenty iwi Tūhoe has banned hunting in Te Urewera regardless of what the government decides, saying it's concerned an influx of hunters could see accidents or transmission of the virus into the community. About 2,000 hunters usually descend on the mountain park at this time of year during the raw season. But Iwi Cheers Forum Pandemic Response spokesperson Mike Smith says whānau who rely on hunting to put food on the table should be given some leniency.
If you rely upon hunting to get your food, well, yes. But if you're a recreational person who just wants to go off and blow off a bit of ammunition and kill a few things, I'd say no. Well, I think people know, they'll be able to know themselves whether or not they rely upon hunting for food. And those that are recreational hunters, just like shooting guns.
Ngāti Kahu leader Margaret Mutu agrees. She says many whānau in coastal areas in the far north live off fish during the summer and go inland during the winter to live off the bush.
Again, if it's an essential service, in order to feed the whānau, They cannot be criminalised for feeding their own people.
But Mike Smith is urging whānau to think carefully about what they do in the next 2 weeks and only hunt if it's absolutely necessary. He says it would be devastating to see the curve in the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 rise again.
Just do the common sense thing. We've just dodged a major bullet. Seriously, we could have been in so much trouble as a nation. And we should be really proud of ourselves that we dodged that bullet in a way that not many other countries have.
The government is expected to make a decision on hunting by the end of the week. For Checkpoint, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
The race for fast food and delivery chains to get ready in time for Tuesday's rush is on, with each store working to get their fridges fully stocked, their workspaces safe and their deliveries up and running. Many of you will no doubt be hanging out for your first takeaway after so many weeks. But who's open, what are they serving and what measures are they putting in place to ensure your safety? Harry Locke has the answers to your burning questions.
With such anticipation building up, people are being told to be prepared that their fast food might not be so fast on Tuesday. Messages being put out by the fast food companies gearing up for a big Tuesday night are be patient, pay without cash if possible, and prepare for a reduced menu. McDonald's hopes to have its 137 drive-thrus open at 5 a.m, but the head of communications, Simon Kenny, says there will be a smaller choice than customers are used to.
Our focus is going to be on getting all of the core items that people have been craving, the cheeseburgers, the Big Macs, the McNuggets, shakes and sundaes, fries available. Things like the Angus burgers, which use a different patty, obviously Angus beef, and a different bun. We'll get to those once we've restocked the restaurants.
Before the lockdown, around 1.6 million New Zealanders went to Macca's every week. Delivering to that number of people after 4 weeks away is going to be tricky. Mr. Kenny says a reduced menu means they can focus on the key foodstuffs to be able to provide to that customer base.
We now have to work to literally get lettuces picked from fields into our processors to get them moved to the restaurant, get the bakery supplier back, beef patty plants just outside of New Plymouth back up and running. So our suppliers themselves have got a huge job to get the food made to then get to our restaurants.
He says they're putting measures in place to ensure the safety of staff. Dining in store is not allowed, pickups are through drive-through only, and customers are being asked to use PayWave. The pizza company Domino's is also adopting precautionary measures. Deliveries will be contactless and there will be no pickups in store to begin with. When it comes to staff safety, Domino's General Manager Cameron Toomey says they're at an advantage.
The good thing about a pizza store is the pizza, I suppose, follows a bit of a line. It goes from the saucer down the make bench and then into the oven and then the person cuts it. And the good thing about that is that it allows our team members to maintain that distance between each other.
They're spicing things up, opening earlier than usual at 9:30 so those who want pizza for breakfast can get one. Other big companies are firing up as well. Burger Fuel will be operating a contactless pickup service as well as a curbside pickup and delivery. Tank Juice Bar will be serving via Uber Eats, and Hell's Pizza hopes to have their 76 chains going by 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday. Their CEO Ben Cummings says they're having to undergo the biggest operational change in one day they've ever had.
We're really looking forward to serving pizza again, but the new operational and safety requirements will be a little bit difficult for stores to get used to, and we're expecting quite long lead times for deliveries and also contactless pickups as well. So really just hoping that customers will appreciate that and be a little bit more patient than they normally would.
The Unite Union General Secretary Jared Heyer says it's crucial not to put pressure on the fast side of fast food.
If you turn up at 5 p.m. on Tuesday thinking you're going to get your meal in 10 minutes or quarter of an hour, you're dreaming. People need to think about this, because what happens is that when there are delays, people get frustrated and they get aggressive, and that just adds to a whole other layer of stress and threats to the health and safety of the workers.
Mr. Hayes says to further protect the staff, he wants to see cash payments got rid of and greater protections for staff at drive-thrus. The message for fans of KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell and Carl's Jr. is you might have to be a bit more patient. Each restaurant must show it has adopted enhanced cleaning, hygiene and social distancing measures, and all staff members must have received safety training before that store is allowed to open. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
So much feedback from you all about Air New Zealand and refunds and credits. Let's try to get to some of it. Jules says, Air New Zealand claiming that X number of people have opted to put their flights in credit is utter balderdash. They haven't given people the option to refund. The credit is the least worst option. I bet 99% would opt to have their money back, says Jules. Anne-Marie has got in touch to say, I'm really unhappy about the unprofessional way Air New Zealand has managed their cancelled flights. Our flights to Brisbane from Wellington for a birthday were cancelled. We've had no further communication from them since the email was sent to us on the 23rd of March. There is no record online. When I look at my Air New Zealand account, the booking was just wiped and replaced with nothing. We paid $1,300 for our flights and could so desperately need these funds right now to get us through difficult times. I feel this is really unfair. And another person says, I'm owed $2,800 by Air New Zealand and cannot afford not to be repaid. I'm paying interest on a credit card that I can't afford to pay with no income. If they can't deliver my flight, the contract is broken. Meanwhile, execs earn 1.2 to 2.8 million per annum. I'm on a government wage subsidy, first time on a benefit in 40 years of work. Really angry, as this is a lot of money. Also, my son and his partner are owed $7,000 and potentially lost jobs.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi, good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The government is pumping an extra $30 million into food parcels and emergency accommodation. The Civil Defence Minister Penny Henare says it's committed to meeting the urgent need out there. The money will help fund local food banks and other welfare providers for food and other essential household items. Local authorities and civil defence emergency management groups will also get funding to increase welfare support. The money is in addition to $27 million last month for NGOs and community groups. Pharmac has frozen plans to fund a lung cancer drug that would have helped at least 1,400 patients a year, saying it can no longer afford to make the investment. The move has dashed hopes that Keytruda would soon be publicly funded for New Zealand's biggest cancer killer. Pharmac has put a request for proposal where drug companies are asked to pitch their products and prices on hold. The Chief Executive, Sarah Fitz, says it was concerned about rising drug prices worldwide in the pandemic and couldn't commit to funding the drug now.
There are obviously products that have been used, in much bigger quantities overseas, particularly, say, in intensive care. So, the availability of those products reduces, the price goes up.
Lung Foundation Chief Executive Philip Hope says many cancer patients will be devastated and feel they had been given false hope. An infectious diseases expert says health boards need to be clear about what PPE is necessary to protect staff from COVID-19. After identifying damp PPE as the likely reason 3 staff got the virus, Canterbury District Health Board is making staff change their face masks every 2 hours. It's also offering full filter N95 masks to staff who find them more comfortable, though it says they aren't necessary for clinical reasons. Associate Professor at the University of Auckland School of Medical Sciences, Mark Thomas, says that could create more problems.
When there is a genuine reason for somebody to be wearing personal protective equipment, then they should be wearing the full kit that's required, not just part of it. And this sort of sloppiness of, oh yes, if you feel like it, then you should use it, with regard to N95 masks, helps to weaken that clear message of what staff should be doing.
Infectious diseases expert Mark Thomas. The Auckland Mayor says what happened during the Sky City International Convention Centre fire should be used to raise construction standards. The centre's roof ignited in October last year and burned for 3 days, causing major disruption in Auckland CBD. Fire and emergency investigators have ruled the blaze accidental, finding it was started by a worker's blowtorch being briefly exposed to roofing material that smouldered unnoticed for more than half an hour. Phil Goff says while it's a relief the fire was accidental, the construction industry would have to take greater care in future.
I think that if anything, we have to continually upgrade the standards in the Building Code and the Building Act to ensure that we minimise the prospect of both severe damage and even worse, loss of life. Unfortunately, in this instance, there was no loss of life.
Auckland Mayor Phil Goff. Teddy bears will be appearing on New Zealand Post's newest stamp collection. The stamps will pay homage to the movement that's seen New Zealanders place bears in their windows for children to hunt down during lockdown. New Zealand Post's head of stamps, Anthony Harris, is inviting people to submit photos of their bears, with 6 to be chosen to feature. He says $3 from the sale of every sheet will be donated to the Red Cross, the New Zealand Red Cross. The Share Your Bears campaign closes next Tuesday and entries can be submitted on the NZ Stamps and Coins Facebook page. A man is in custody tonight after barricading himself in a house in Auckland during a standoff with police. The police say the man threatened members of the public on Jeffs Road in Flatbush before shutting himself inside and threatening officers. He was arrested shortly after 5 o'clock. It's 4 minutes past 6. In sport this evening, the New Zealand men's Olympic football squad have written an impassioned letter to the national body as the future of the team's coaches reportedly comes under threat. The group say they're disappointed New Zealand football, who are under financial pressure because of the COVID-19 enforced lockdown, may axe some or all of the Ollie coaching team. The letter adds the players are particularly concerned head coach Des Buckingham's job may be under scrutiny. The All Blacks veteran Sam Whitelock says players will need a 3 to 4 week lead-in before any restart to get match fit. As a New Zealand's Players Union board member, the 115 Test lock is heavily involved in scenario planning with New Zealand Rugby about a potential resumption of the season. Whitelock told Sky Sports several calendars are being debated, adding players need to be ready to go when the government provides clearance for professional sport to return. He was set to complete a short-term contract with Japanese club Panasonic, but has returned home after Japan's domestic competition was cancelled. And that's the news.
Food banks face shortages.
It's Christmas on steroids.
Lockdown breaches increase.
We recorded over 800 breaches of the lockdown conditions over the weekend.
And breaches of a different kind.
To small prizes, that's a 12-week interesting contribution there, Corin.
Apologies for Stanley getting a bit excited in the background there. Yeah.
He loves a good bit of economic talk, I know that.
No fluff. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Another short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Fine for the rest of today, scattered showers or drizzle developing tomorrow. Waitomo to Manawatu, including central high country, fine apart from areas of morning and evening cloud or fog. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mainly fine. Isolated showers developing in Gisborne and Wairarapa from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne tonight, tomorrow afternoon for Wairarapa. Horowhenua to Wellington, also Nelson and Marlborough. Fine for the rest of today, scattered rain or showers developing tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and mainland Southland, mainly fine, high cloud. However, scattered rain about Southland and Otago at times. A few spots possible in South Canterbury. Buller, Westland, Fiordland and Stewart Island, a few showers turning to rain for a time tomorrow. Chatham Islands, fine and cloudy periods. 6.5 minutes past 6.
And you're with Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Outdated consumer laws could mean travellers grounded due to COVID-19 are stuck with thousands of dollars in airline credits they may never get to use. Checkpoint's been inundated with correspondence from customers booked to fly with Air New Zealand. But the coronavirus pandemic means their flights have either been cancelled or they can't make the trips due to border controls and isolation requirements. They want refunds, but say Air New Zealand is only offering them credits that are of limited use. So what exactly are their rights and your rights if you've got a trip booked and it's gone belly up? Well, Jessica Wilson is the head of research at Consumer New Zealand and joins us now. Good evening, Jessica. Generally speaking, if you've booked an airline ticket and the pandemic means, well, it's pretty much utterly impractical to take that trip, are you entitled to get your money back?
Unfortunately, our consumer laws here are not as strong as they should be, and consumers don't have an automatic right to a refund in these situations. We've been pushing for that to change. The situation is at the moment is that you're basically dependent on what the airline's terms and conditions say regarding cancelled flights. So in most cases, airlines are providing credits and not refunds.
To be clear, if they cancel the flight, are you in a better position or just exactly the same position?
Yeah, look, where the airline is at fault, where it's something to do with their staffing or the plane that they've had to ground it, then they have to cough up, they have to refund you. But in situations where the airline isn't at fault and the flight can't leave the tarmac because of reasons such as a global pandemic, then the airline isn't responsible for financial losses in that case.
So it's your view at Consumer NZ that our laws around this aren't fit for purpose at the moment?
That is right, and it's something we've been pushing for some time. If you compare the situation, for example, in the EU or the US, customers there have an automatic right to a refund, regardless of the reason the flight's cancelled. Not the same here. We think it should be, and we've been asking for the law to be changed. So consumers aren't stuck in this situation where they're basically out of pocket in some situations by thousands of dollars.
So when was it last reviewed in respect of aviation sector airline tickets?
Oh, many decades ago. There has been a review of the Civil Aviation Act recently that unfortunately hasn't seen significant changes in terms of consumer rights. So obviously the situation we're in now has provided ample evidence of the need to revamp our laws, and we'll be making that case again to the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs.
We have been utterly inundated with feedback and correspondence about this, and a lot of people say that their purchase, their airline tickets, have automatically been converted into a credit by Air New Zealand. So there is no if, buts or maybes. Air New Zealand is in the right in terms of their ability to do that.
Yeah, look, there are a few exceptions. The exceptions would be if you actually did buy a fully flexible fare that entitled you to a refund. In that case, the airline should reimburse you, no questions asked. In other situations, if it was a standard fare, you will be reliant on their terms and conditions, and those terms and conditions typically say in these situations where the airline isn't at fault, you will only get a credit.
In terms of the credits, people are also raising the issue of the duration of the credit. Air New Zealand says it's pushed out the period of time you can maintain the credit until I think it's June 2021. So you've got a book in between that time. But a number of customers have got in touch to say the airline is operating a much reduced schedule, and in fact most flights, you can't even see the flights that will be available in that booking period as yet. So is there any flexibility around the credit and the terms of the credit?
Yeah, well, look, Air New Zealand will have to definitely look at this. At the moment, consumers are in the situation where you're right, they can't make definitive travel plans because so many things are unknown. We don't know if and when flights will resume, not just here but internationally as well. So consumers really can't make plans. Air New Zealand will have to take that into account, and it will have to extend those timeframes again if the situation we're in drags on. It's the right thing to do. It really has to do right by its customers in this case, not just rely on the fine print in its terms and conditions. It needs to play fair, really.
So a number again of listeners have raised this term frustrated contract, where they say both parties are unable to meet the conditions of the contract, and should they not just part company and get a refund? Is any of that ringing a bell with you? Yeah,
look, there is in legal terms something called a frustrated contract. The fly in the ointment here is that legislation actually it exempts airlines from providing refunds in this situation. So because there is sort of a legal basis for the position airlines are taking, it would be pretty difficult, we think, to mount a case for frustrated contracts in this situation.
Wow, it sounds like people are in an absolutely tight bind, and some of them are financially in a tight bind. They're saying that, they actually need the money back. People have lost jobs in the meantime. The prospect of overseas travel in the next 18 months to 2 years isn't on their radar because their own financial positions have changed here. So we've got a Prime Minister who's asking people to be kind, asking landlords to be flexible, for employers to be flexible. You touched on this before, but do you think there's a moral or ethical obligation for Air New Zealand to be more flexible here?
Absolutely. Look, we have said since the start of this that airlines should be doing the right thing. They should be offering refunds to customers where flights have been cancelled because of COVID-19. It's the right thing to do, regardless of what their terms and conditions say or what the law says. Be fair, that's what we're saying.
Have you had many inquiries about this?
We have indeed, yes. We've been pretty busy answering inquiries about cancelled flights, cancelled accommodation. It has been a big issue for our consumer advisors.
The other thing that we've had some questions about are insurance, and some of these people are older travellers, so their insurance is huge, in the thousands. And one woman has a trip that's been cancelled. She's got an insurance policy, haven't obviously left the shore, and the insurance company is not playing ball in terms of refunding that. What is the position there?
Yeah, look, that is pretty outrageous behaviour. travel insurance policies do vary. Some of them do provide a right to a refund where you're not going on the trip and need to cancel your policy. And in fact, there's no reason for a travel company to hold on to that money because it's not covering any risk. If you're not flying, you're not leaving the country, there's no liability for it and no risk for it to cover. So really, insisting that it has the right to retain your premium is totally unfair.
Has Consumer New Zealand had any kind of response to trying to get this back on the table, these law changes?
Well, not yet, no, because Parliament's not sitting at the moment.
Of course,
we haven't been able to progress things, but certainly when we're able to, we will be putting this in front of the Minister and hoping to see some changes.
Really appreciate your time. That's Jessica Wilson, who's the Head of Research at Consumer New Zealand. President Donald Trump has clarified yesterday's shocking and ambiguous tweet announcing he would ban immigration into the US. He's explained an executive order is likely to be signed tomorrow aimed at protecting American jobs during the coronavirus crisis. The ban will apply only to people seeking permanent residence.
By pausing immigration, we'll help put unemployed Americans first in line for jobs as America reopens. It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in from abroad. This pause will be in effect for 60 days, after which the need for any extension or modification will be evaluated.
President Trump's critics say he's trying to distract from the crisis. The US has more than 45,000 deaths and millions have already lost work. The BBC's Katie Kay is in Washington.
As we've seen before with President Trump, when he announces immigration policy on Twitter, the initial offering seems to be a lot more dramatic and draconian than actually the details of the policy itself. And it became clear during the course of the White House press briefing that this is actually a much more limited restriction. It applies for 60 days only to people who are applying for green cards. So if you're wanting to come to America on a temporary work visa to work for a company here, that is not included in this restriction. If you are coming to America to work in the agriculture industry, a lot of farmers here depend on part-time workers. They also are exempt from this restriction. If you're coming to work in the healthcare industry, also exempt from the restriction. So it's really only about people applying for green cards and only at the moment anyway for 60 days. We know that President Trump has wanted to tackle the issue of legal immigration and not just illegal immigration into the country. And some of his critics have said that he's using the coronavirus as a pretext in order to restrict legal immigration into the country. During the press conference, he pushed back on that idea. He denied that that was the plan and that he was doing this just on a temporary basis in order to protect American workers' jobs. Remember, 22 million Americans have lost their jobs, and so he said he wanted to make sure that he gave those jobs to Americans first and foremost.
Katie Kay reporting. It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. New Zealand venison farmers are being caught out by the Chinese government's moves to crack down on the trade of wild meat. The confusion has prompted some processors here to hold off shipping venison to the country until things can be ironed out. Rural reporter Maya Burry has more.
China has been tightening its rules on the trade of wild meat in the wake of the coronavirus outbreak, which is thought to have originated in a wild animal market in Wuhan. The chief executive of Silver Fern Farms, Simon Limmer, says despite the venison it processes and exports being a farmed product, not a wild one, there's been issues for shipments to China.
Yeah, there is a bit of confusion into China at the moment, and there was a change whereby anything which was deemed to be wild meat was being excluded. Now, venison obviously is a farmed product, and that just needed some clarification. We're still just waiting for confirmation that that has been clarified and that we can ensure that there are no hold-ups getting into that market.
Last year, only about 10% of New Zealand's $200 million venison exports went to China, but it's a growing market. Simon Limmer says there's been softer demand for venison in other countries due to COVID-19, which makes access to China even more important.
It's a restaurant-focused product, so at the moment, with very few people around the world going out and eating through restaurants, it is very, very challenging for a product like venison. So having a China, a growing market, and the opportunity to spread that market mix a little bit further is really useful to us. So it is important that we get the get the market access clarified.
The Chief Executive of Deer Industry New Zealand, Innes Moffat, says while some venison has still managed to successfully enter China, it's working with the New Zealand government to get trade flowing normally. He says China's Ministry for Agriculture has been consulting on a list of species that will be allowed to be raised for meat. Mr Moffat says that list does include red deer, and once the document is finalised, it should help get exports back on track.
It may be a few weeks before the final list is published, but we think that's a very strong signal that the confusion over venison's status can be clarified.
But even once the issues in China are ironed out, Mr Moffat says this year will still be challenging. He says in recent times there has been good demand and prices for New Zealand venison, but the global economic impact of COVID-19 will result in fewer people eating premium proteins at restaurants.
And so sheep meat, beef, New Zealand venison, it's going to be tough for all of us. Farmers are going to have to be well supported by their venison processing companies. They're also going to have to be very mindful of some of the costs which are in the system this year. And we are going to be needing to rely on some new means of distribution this year as we find some new markets because, people aren't going to have a lot of money in their pockets.
Coastal Southland deer farmer John Somerville is chair of the Deer Farmers Association. Mr Somerville says luckily the COVID-19 disruption hasn't hit at the peak of the export season in spring, but he has no doubt COVID-19 will have an impact on farm gate prices.
This is certainly something totally different, I've been in the industry a long time, all my working life. It's like all industries, we've had our moments where we don't know what the results of this are going to be, but we just hope that we've got enough diversification in our markets and flexibility in our approach to be able to cope with it.
Mr Somerville says after a tough summer and now autumn for much of the country, with not nearly enough rain in some parts and too much in others, the immediate focus of farmers will be on getting through winter. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Maya Burry.
If Her Majesty the Queen was a feathered creature, which one would she be? Royal photographer Arthur Edwards knows. With the Queen and her family in lockdown for the past 3 weeks, the 40-year veteran is training his lens on his garden. Our producer Bridget Burke called him to find out which birds in their finery remind him of the princes and princesses who are now behind castle walls.
I'm at Brentwood. I live in Brentwood in Essex. We're home with my darling wife Anne. And I don't think we've been this much time together since we had a holiday in New Zealand for 3 weeks.
And is that a good thing, presumably, Arthur?
Yes, it is a good thing.
Arthur talks like it's the first conversation he's had in yonks.
And the weather's been glorious. We've had, since we've locked down, I think we've had 1 day of rain and we've had sort of sunshine most days. And unusual for April. Normally it's April showers.
I'm talking to Arthur in England on what is the Queen's actual birthday, but there's no pic of her blowing out the candles today.
The Royals are locked down too. The Queen is at Windsor with the Duke, and she's very, very isolated. The Prince of Wales, as you know, has already had the virus and recovered, but he and the Duchess are up at Balmoral on their home there at Burke Hall, and of course William and Catherine at their home in Norfolk, so everybody's battened down and nobody's doing anything.
He tells me about his beautiful garden.
I was sitting out there one morning and I saw this robin, very bold, and I thought, well, I'm going to take a couple of pictures of him, and I did. I've got all the long lenses from covering the Royals, so it wasn't difficult. And I shot a really nice picture and I just posted it, and the interest was huge. Over 1,000 people liked it. I did a couple of more, and they were liked. And then I was out there one day, and there was a blackbird collecting for his young. He's obviously his wife. The hen is sitting on the eggs, and so he's collecting worms and grubs for her. A nice picture of that. So then the sparrows. These are all English country garden birds, and the sparrows are very rare lately. They've been disappeared for a while, and they've come back, and I did some of them, and then we've got the blue tits and the great tits and the coal tits.
More on tits later.
Of course, I spend a lot of money on bird food, and so they know where to come and get fed. And then, of course, after you do that for a while, I thought, I've got to get one flying. Well, they fly at an incredible fast rate, and I spent 2 hours one day until I got a picture a robin flying, and then the goldfinch came. Now, we don't often see goldfinches much. Stunning looking bird. And it gives me a little buzz, and I go, and when I look at them on the computer, I see it, and and sometimes I'm surprised, especially with the flying pictures, because their wings make some much fabulous shapes. So fast, it's unbelievable. You can't, it's a blur almost. I mean, how do you photograph a blur with a bit of luck?
You managed to do so quite well, Arthur. They are absolutely stunning pictures. Are some of these birds returned visitors you've not seen for a while in your garden that have come back as a result of how quiet things are now?
I think so, and also, we've got no cars now because people, you can only make essential car journeys. So the lane where we live, there's almost no traffic, so it's peaceful. And so the bird song has become much more prominent now. I mean, the robin's become the star because each garden in Britain has a resident robin, and he makes his nest normally nearby in one of the hedges. And very early in the morning when the sun's coming up, I've done pictures in that golden hour of the robin being beautifully lit and his beautiful red breast bursting out in colour. And so it's been, for 3 weeks I've been doing it now. We've been 3 weeks locked down now.
Arthur, if the robin is a member of the royal family, who would he be?
Oh, he would be probably Prince Harry if he was still here. The beautiful red breast with Harry's beautiful red hair.
Ah, Harry, the little robin that flew the nest.
He, in my view, was one of the nicest, was the absolute nicest, greatest person to work with. He was just a fantastic. I remember when we came to New Zealand with him, he just wowed, played with the kids. He was.
You've had a lot of affection for Harry, and you've watched him grow up. Do you think you'll see him again?
I would have said 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, yes. I think when the year's up, the Queen's given him a year to think about it, he would come back. I kind of still hope he will, because every picture I've seen of him in Los Angeles, he looks so sad. He doesn't look like he's enjoying it at all. And he was walking around hand in hand with Meghan, looking absolutely miserable, and I felt sorry for him. I felt, what are you doing there, Harry? You're not happy with it. It's been misery. In fact, I've not covered the last two tours. The Australia-New Zealand one, I've not covered that, and I didn't cover the South Africa one because I just can't bear to see him behave like that. It just makes me, I can't see it.
Gosh, I'm trying to get you to stay on the subject of birds.
Now, with the birds, of course, they think they've just got to get on with their every day, finding food and rearing their young and trying to avoid the egg stealers and the crows and the magpies, but they do give you a lot of pleasure. And
I can't really be sure if he's talking about birds or members of the royal family at this point.
Watching their behaviour, and each one's different. Some are nervous. Some would come right up to you while you're sitting in the garden, almost at your feet, looking for food. Others, when you just move a hand, they buzz off again,
They are darling photos, the birds, but it's not the same as snapping royals.
I can't wait to get back on the royal beat, to be honest with you, Bridget. I am missing it. I know it's like after 40 years you think, haven't you had enough of it? Well, no, I haven't.
Arthur, there must be some similarities too. When you're photographing these beautiful little birds, they're essentially animated fascinators, are they not?
Well, they are, of course, and also, when you look at the goldfinch, that is a beautiful, well-dressed bird.
It's something you would wear on your head to a wedding.
Well, imagine a red hat on one of the royal ladies. They are beautiful creatures. When the royals go out to work, especially the ladies, they always dress beautifully, and of course these birds are dressed for the summer now, and they look very beautiful too.
All right, Arthur, if the Queen is a tiny little feathered friend, which birdie is she?
I think the robin. The robin he's my favourite. He's in the garden every day.
So the robin is the Queen and Prince Harry?
Well, and Robin is the Queen and Prince Harry. Of course, the goldfinch is Kate. The blackbird is Charles, because he never stops working, the blackbird. He works tirelessly. The tits are the grandchildren, George and Charlotte and Louis. The main one, of course, is the goldfinch, who's the prima donna. She's Catherine, and she looks stunning.
I'm reminded of an old saying, something about rooster, feather duster. Which bird is Megan?
Oh, I can't tell you. I haven't found that one yet. The old crow's not come in the garden yet. No, I don't mean that. I mean, no, we've got to still find Megan. I think
Yes, you meant that, Arthur.
No, I didn't mean that. No, she's yet to come into the garden. I think I'll know when she gets there.
And that was the delightful royal photographer Arthur Edwards speaking to our producer Bridget Burke there. So time for a little bit of your feedback before we head off. So many of you got in touch with us about Air New Zealand and issues around cancellation policies. This person says, I have 5 tickets to New York worth $10,000 and Air New Zealand has cancelled the flight and will only offer me a credit. I am furious. They then offer me 1 year to use that money. I will probably take them to the disputes tribunal. Hamish, though, says, try my $3,200 Virgin Australia credit for our family of 4 for Dunedin to Brisbane return flights. They're in voluntary administration or something, so I'll doubt we'll see that again. At least the government, Air New Zealand is government-backed, says Hamish. And this person says, Sally from Wellington has got in contact to say, thousands of us have lost money on travel bookings, ! Look at one's losses with Air New Zealand as an investment in our fabulous national airline. We are lucky to be alive and not have our society ravaged by COVID like many other places overseas. Travel gripes seem like a luxury concern when thousands of people have no jobs or income. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The government is spending an extra $30 million on food parcels and emergency accommodation. Pharmac says it can no longer afford to fund a lung cancer drug that would have helped at least 1,400 patients a year. Air New Zealand customers are expressing anger. The airline is offering credit instead of refunds for flights cancelled due to COVID-19. And a man is in custody tonight after barricading himself in a house in Auckland during a standoff with police. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Tonight on Nights, Sasha Green from the Citizens Advice Bureau on ways to overcome the divide between the digital haves and have-nots. Ebony Lamb sings Down the Line from Paikakariki. We look back at 4 weeks of lockdown with the epidemiologist Michael Baker and what he hopes to see in the first 4 weeks at level 3. And there's an Anzac slant to this week's Hump Quiz on Night.